Special thing is who comes first for an aliyah. Not immediately. How do we know that a kohen is the first one to get an aliyah? Amar of Masnad, Amar Kro, Vayichtav Moshe Torah Hazais. Moshe wrote the Torah, Vayitna al Kehanim b'nei Levi. He gave the Torah to the Kehanim, the children of Levi. So the Gemara says, Oto no lo yadanan to Kehanim b'nei Levi. Don't I know that the Kehanim are b'nei Levi? Kehanim obviously are all the children of Levi, because Kehanim are all the children of Aaron, who are all the children of Levi. Elo must be that over here is a reference that Kehanim b'nei Levi, when you talk about a Torah, means that the aliyah of the Torah, Kehanim go first, and then Levium. Rabbi Tzidnafcha says from here, V'nikshu Kehanim b'nei Levi, the Kehanim, the children of Levi, will approach. Same thing. Oto an lo yadina the Kehanim b'nei Levi. Don't I know the Kehanim or the children of Levi? Ella, it must be that Kohen Beresha v'Hadra Levi. First, the Kohen gets an aliyah, and then a Levi. Ravashi Amram Mehalcha. Ravashi says from here, Bnei Amram, the children of Amram, Aaron u'Moshe. By Yibodel Aaron lahakdisha kodesh kadoshim, and Aaron was separated to be kodesh kadoshim. You see from here that a Kohen and a Levi, the Kohen is separated and he goes first. Rabbi says from here, the Torah says that you have to make a Levi kodesh, and that what that means is you have to separate him for every matter of spiritual significance, and one of those is getting an aliyah. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel taught to kidash the chol davar shebekdusha, liftach rishon, to be the first one to read from the Torah, levarach rishon, to be the first one to bench, v'lital mana yafer rishon, to be the first one to take food. Only Abai Yosef. Okay. He says to him, according to all these psukim, it's not the Mishnah says Kohen gets an aliyah first because to keep peace. And over here we see it's deraisa. There's a biblical obligation. He says deraisa, it is deraisa. And why did the Torah say the Kohen goes first? Because of darkei shalom. Because the Torah said the Kohen goes first so that you should be able to keep the peace. So the Gemara says, Kol Torah kulanamim the darkei shalom. Everything the Torah says is in the pathway of bringing peace, as the verse states. The pathways are pleasant, and the pathways are sweet, and the roads are pleasant. Following the Torah, it brings peace. El Amar Abaya says, like this opinion, the Tanya we learned, Shnayim mamtin and zel zeh b'kaira. If you have two people waiting to eat, so then each one waits for the other one. Shlosh, if you have three people, ein mamtinim, you don't have to wait. Havitzeya, the one who makes the bracha on the food, he's the first one to take from the bread. If he wants to honor somebody else, then he has the right to. Okay. Now, so typically speaking, when the one who's honored with breaking bread, he has the choice to choose somebody else to honor. However, we learned on this, this is only true when you're breaking bread. Even though the Kohen is honored first with the first aliyah, he does not have the right to pass that on to somebody else. And that's the darkei shalom, because it will result in fights. Amar Master says, Hoda Amar basic netzes loi. This that we do not allow the Kohen to hand over his honor in the shul. Lo Amar, and it's only true Ela b'Shabbos v'Yom Tovim, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the Shchichi Rabbim, where you have a lot of people there. B'Sheni v'Chamishi loi. But on Monday and Thursdays, where there's not a lot of people, then the Kohen is allowed to give up his own. He's allowed to choose somebody else to take the place of his honor. Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that on Shabbos, the Kohen can give up his honor to somebody who's more worthy than him. Aini, it's not the case. Rav Huna was the leader of the generation. He was not a Kohen, he was Yisrael, and he got the first aliyah. He got the aliyah of Kohen. Evidently, a Kohen must have honored him with the aliyah. And we see from here that if a kohen honors you with the aliyah, a kohen has the ability to hand over his own honor to somebody else. The Gemara says, "Shiny Rav Huna, I feel Rav Ami, Rav Asi, Kahani, Chashivi, Eretz Yisrael, make it have a kayaflay." Okay, the Gemara's response in a nutshell is that a great scholar who's sort of unquestioned is allowed to receive kohen, and is an example to prove that Rav Huna is a great scholar. The Mishnah says that even Rav Ami and Rav Asi, who were the scholars of Eretz Yisrael, and they were Kohanim, they would still make way for Rav Huna. They would still accord him honor. Amar Abaya says, "Nakin we learned, Ein Shem Kohen Nisbar the Chavila. If there is no Kohen, then you do not honor a Levi first. You could, you may, but you don't. But there's no obligation to." But Amar Abaya says, Nakin we learned, Ein Shem Levi. Let's say there's no Levi. A Kohen reads in his place. The Gemara says, "Any can't be that a kohen reads in his place." For Amar v'yechem kohen achar kohen layikra mishukam mishalrishin. You can't have a kohen who gets an aliyah after the first kohen. Why? Because then they'll presume the first kohen is not a valid kohen. He's really a chol. He's an invalid kohen. Levi achar Levi layikra mishum v'gam shneim. One Levi after another shouldn't read because then you'll presume that both are invalid. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Ki kamrinan ba'itz kohen." What do we mean to say that if there's no Levi, we give a kohen an aliyah? We mean to say that we give the same kohen an aliyah. So we give kohen both the first aliyah, what we call kohen, and the second aliyah, which would be Levi. Okay. Ma'ishna Levi achar Levi de'ika pegam shneim. Okay. So now the Gemara wants to know as follows: if you read two kohanim one after another, you presume the first kohen was invalid. Whereas if you read two Leviim one after another, you presume both are invalid. What's the difference? Where you presume that both are invalid. The Amri, why? Because people will say, one of these people is not a Levi. They'll presume one of these people is not a Kohen. So Gemara says, we know that the second guy is a Kohen, and therefore we'll presume the first guy is not a Kohen. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. If we know the second guy is a Kohen, we probably know that the second Levi to get the Aliyah is also is an actual Levi. So therefore, why don't we presume that the first Levi is just the first Levi is invalid, not both Leviim? So the Gemara says, El Amri. El Amri, it must be that even if the second guy is known to be Kohen, people might think that he married, or that his father married a mamzer or nosin, a pasal lazari. Hachanami Amri Grusha Chalutz Nasav Achla Lazari. With regard to a Levi, how do you become invalid as a Levi? The answer is that you become invalid as Yisrael, which is if you basically marry a mamzer, in which case the child is a mamzer, not a Levi. Now, one second. Okay, so if you have two Leviim at one after another, you know the second guy is a Levi. You still will presume they're both problematic. Why? Because you presume maybe his father married a mamzer, a mamzeros, and therefore he's not a Levi. Well, the same thing is true with a Kohen. Even if the Kohen is known to be the child of a Kohen, maybe his mother was a Grusha or Chalutza. So again, back to the original question, why is there a difference between a Levi that we presume both are invalid and a Kohen we presume the first one's invalid? The Gemara says, Levi Mikahav. Okay. So the Gemara says, even if we have a Kohen, hold on. Okay, so the Gemara's resolution here is that sort of the difference between a Levi and a Kohen is a minor one. As follows: when we talk about a Levi being invalid, we don't mean that he's invalid as a Levi. We mean to say that there's sort of a stain on him. In other words, the scenario we're talking about is where the suspicion people might have is that his father was either a grusha or chalutza. Now, a Levi whose father was divorced, or married a divorcee or married a chalutza, he's still a Levi. There's no obligation for a Levi to marry a woman who's not a grusha or chalutza. But there's sort of a stain, meaning that people are going to think that he married a grusha or chalutza. And therefore, if you call two Leviim one after another, somebody might think that both of them potentially, or either one of them, they're still Leviim, but their father did marry a grusha, a divorcee, which is considered here, second best or second rate. It's not doesn't invalidate him, but there's sort of a stain that he's the son of a divorcee. Okay. So Mara says in general, who exactly are we concerned with having these thoughts? Ili Yoshvin, if they're the people that are sitting there, meaning they're sitting there throughout the Torah reading, so they'll count how many aliyahs there were. They'll see that everyone's aliyah counted. If the guy wasn't a real kohen, his aliyah wouldn't count. We're last line of the Testament base 59b.
59b.
Yep. Eli Yotzin, it's the people that leave. In other words, somebody might have been there in the beginning, thinks that one of these people is invalid, and actually they'll be calling another 7 people. So it'll be eight aliyahs total. Or maybe they'll, during the week, they'll do another 3. The people of Galila asked Rav Chalbai, Acharan mi Kairan. Is there any other preference for after Kayan and Levi? He wasn't sure. Also, he went to ask Rav Yitzchak. Nafcha is a blacksmith. We call scholars that were appointed as a parnas. A parnas is sort of, not only is he a scholar, but also he's a treasurer, or he's a large donor to the poor in the community. And after that, somebody who fits the bill, even though he wasn't appointed as a parnas. And after who fits the bill, he fits the requirements.
Oh, okay.
Even though he wasn't actually a parnas. And after them, the children of scholars whose parents were appointed as parnasim on the tzibur. And after those, Rosh Knesias, general leadership, the Kollel, and then everybody else. The people of Gol, the northern part of Israel, have sent Rav Chalbai the following question. Is somebody allowed to read in a chumash in the shul, the tzibur? Okay, what is a chumash? So today we call a chumash this book that's printed and bound together, at the folds of the paper. In the time of the Gemara, a chumash was a book that was not. So you have Torah has 5 chumashim. Mm-hmm. Each Torah is comprised of a scroll of each of the 5 chumashim bound together. The question of whether you could read a chumash is whether you could read a scroll that just has one of the 5 chumashim.
Oh.
Also, Shailer Yitzchak, they went to ask Yitzchak. He wasn't sure either. Also, Shalbei Madrashi, he asked in the study hall. Upashtua Meha, and they answered the following question: the Amr of Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr of Yechanan. Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Sefer Torah shechaser Uriah Achas ein karam bay. A scroll that's missing 1 Uriah, you do not read from that scroll. Okay, hold on a second. If a Torah is missing 1 scroll, so Uriah is sort of a single parchment. So the Torah is a composition. I think it's typically in the 40-something, 35 parchments that are stitched together. And if one of those is missing, Sif Torah is invalid. So certainly, if a whole chumash is missing, it should be invalid. Or if you have one chumash without the rest, the Gemara says, "V'lohi," it's not a good proof. Hasam mechser v'milsi. Over there, the chumash is missing something which was intended to be part of it. Tachal mechser v'milsi. Over here, it's just supposed to be a chumash. It's not missing anything. Rabbi Yosef said, "Ein karen b'chumashim basic classes. You cannot read from a chumash, but they covered tzibur because it's not honorable for the congregation."
Why is it not honorable for the congregation?
You should read from a full scroll.
All right.
Rabbi Yosef Damin Travayo, Hai Sifra de Aftarta, also the Mikri Bebe Shabbos. If you have a sefer of Haftarah, you should not use it on Shabbos. What's a Sifra de Aftarta?
What's that?
Sifra de Aftarta.
Okay.
Chabad is very much, but he's a Sifra de Aftarta. If anyone's been to a Chabad shul, they'll have a Sifra de Aftarta they use. Okay, what exactly is going on here? So after the Torah, we read a section called Haftarah.
Right.
Haftarah is a relatively modern, secondary rabbinical decree. The tradition of reading the Torah is not a biblical invocation, but the tradition goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Monday and Thursdays and Mincha Shabbos goes back to Ezra. At a way later time, the rabbis required it's got to be at least 1,000 or 1,500 years after that, after Moshe Rabbeinu, and a couple hundred years after Ezra, good few hundred years, probably 500-600 years after Ezra, maybe more. They began a tradition to read a section of what we call Navi, that's the prophetic canon, after the Torah reading. Now, in order to fulfill the tradition, ideally, you'd want to scroll from each one of the books of the canon of Nevi'im. Now, obviously, that is an unusual expense because you're only using it once. Some scrolls only use once. Period. Okay, Yeshaya you use a lot, whatever it is, but it's a very large expense. It's not used that often. So therefore, could we allow the following solution? We'll take a scroll of parchment and we'll write out all the haftarahs in the parchment, and then we'll just use that parchment. So Rabbi Yosef say it's not good. You can't use it. My time, why not? Because the truth of the matter is you shouldn't be writing half scrolls on a parchment. Over here, what you're doing is you're taking a portion of every section of the canon, and you're writing it down, and that's incorrect. You should be writing it as part of the entire book. You have no authority to write it. You're cutting it up to cut it up and write it. Okay. Marva Ravashi says, you can't even move it on Shabbos. My time, because if you can't use it, then you can't move it because it's muktzah. And that's not the case. It's not muktzah. You're allowed to move it, and you're also allowed to read from it. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish they would read books of Agadah. What's Agadah? Okay, so let's explain here. Well, the Gemara is going to really go through this, quite well, and that's the subject for today and tomorrow. Let's divide up Torah. So you have the canon, right? Which is traditionally comprised of 3 different sections. There's the 5 books of the Torah, and then there is the remaining 19 books split between prophets and writings, scriptures. Now, those books are supposed to be written down. There's an oral tradition that came with it, which today is written down, which is Mishnayos and Talmud and Medrash and Yerushalmi and Zohar, etc. And then Teres Gehanim and Sifra and Sifri, all the Talmudic level works, which were written down at Talmudic Mishnaic level, and those are not allowed to be written down. They're not allowed to write Mishnayos. What about the fact that we did write Mishnayos? That was an exception to the rule, because everyone's going to forget all the rules. That's why we had to write them down. Technically speaking, they should not be written down. Nobody should be writing down Mishnayos. Nobody should be writing down Talmud. Similarly, if you're writing down Chumash or any of the other books of the canon, you have to follow the rules. Now, over here we see that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are reading a book of Agadah. Agadah is the oral tradition, and it was yet written down, which was not appropriate at the time. Should not have been written down. Only the Mishnayos were written down at the time, not the Gemara. Talmud was not written down. And they read it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to write it. Because people are forgetting these stories, these traditions, so then it became permissible to write it down. There was a moment in time where one had to, in order to make sure that God's word was remembered, if you were Torah, we had to erase the law, and we wrote it down anyway, even though it was forbidden. Hachanami. Here too, even though because buying a full set of Nevi'im, a full set of all the books that are in the prophetic canon is very expensive. Even because it's very expensive. So therefore, you're allowed to write portions of each the segments in the prophetic canon to be written down in a book called the Sifra de Haftarah to be able to be used for the Haftarah. Okay. Abai had the following question from Rabba. Can I write a short? So let's say I'm teaching a child. It's before the days of the printing press, obviously, and I want to print a small section. I want to write, just Parshas Bereshis for him. So this way you can learn just Parshas Bereshis. Okay, so the Gemara says this question is going to be relevant according to two different opinions in the following discussion. When the Torah was written down, the book Torah, which is comprised of 5 Chumashim, how exactly was that book written down? Did Moshe Rabbeinu inscribe passage by passage throughout the sojourn in the desert, or was it written down in one bulk? So okay, now let's go as follows. If it was written down in sections, that's called Megillah. If it was written down in bulk, it's called Torah Chasuma, a sealed book. Let's explain. Now, this question will be relevant according to the opinion that says the Torah was written in sections. It's a question according to the opinion that says the Torah was written in one go at the end of the 40 years. Okay, let's explain. This is a question. If you say the Torah was written in different sections, so maybe the question is because it was written in sections, so I could also write it in sections. If I'm teaching a little kid, I could write him the first parasha of Vayikra, to teach him the first parasha of Vayikra, which, by the way, is the tradition for where little kids start learning. It's a long-standing tradition going back hundreds of years. Little kids start learning Vayikra. First few seconds in Vayikra. Okay, so ideal, or do we say no? Kivan the idbek. At the moment that Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and stitched together all the parchments and made a full scroll, at that point you can no longer separate the scroll. Now, this question is also relevant according to the opinion that says Torah was given as an entire sealed book. It was written all at once. Do we say because it was given as a full book, you have to write the whole book? Or do you say because it's necessary to teach, so you're permitted to write a small, just Parsha Vayikra for a little kid to read? He responded to him, Ein Kaisvin. You can't write it. Umatam, what's the reason? So he says to him, I'm not answering. Lefish Ein Kaisvin, because you can't write it. He didn't answer the question. Says the Gemara, Eisvei. Okay, if you remember in Saita, they would write the parsha, the section of Saita on a parchment. How do they know what to write? So in other words, whenever a person writes, he has to have an original manuscript to compare it against. So what was the original manuscript? So at some point in time, there was a queen. Her name was Hilding. She created a tablet, not the one you're holding, Eric, a metal tablet, and it had in it written down. It had written the whole parsha. Okay, what do we see from here? You could write a portion of the Torah. You're teaching a kid, you could write a portion because a portion was written on the tablets. Afi asla tavel shalzav. It was a gold tablet. Sheparsha saita ksuva alav. The section of Saita was written down. The Kohen would reference that tablet when he was writing the scroll. It actually didn't even say the words. What it had the first letter of every word. Not so fast. Eitzvei. Let's ask a question. Kishu Kaisev, when he would write it, Roya, he would look at the tablet, the Kaisev, and he would write. He would write what it says in the tablet. Gemara says no. He would interpret the first letter of every word and write that down. Esvei, question. He he would read the tablet and write what it said on the tablet. He'd write it on the parchment. Mahu kaseh b'tavol. What did it say? It said, for example, this pasuk, this verse which is in the portion of the Saita, the parsha of Saita, im shachav im loy shachav, etc. Okay, what does this mean? If you looked at the tablet, this is what it said. It would have the first word of every verse, followed by an abbreviation of every word. It would have the first word of the next verse, followed by the first letter of every word. And the kohen would sort of intuit the first letter of the verse, figure out what the rest of the verse was, using the first letter of each word. Okay. Gmara says, "Kitanoi." This is a long-standing debate. Ein kaisvin megillah latinik lehislamid by. One is not allowed to write a small section for a child to teach him the imdaiti lahashlam. However, let's say the kid already learned Vayikra, right? So he taught him Vayikra, and now you go back to Bereshis. So you're teaching him the Torah in order. You're teaching him the Torah in order. So you start from Bereshis, you write him Bereshis, he finishes Bereshis, you write him Noach, etc. Until he finishes the whole scroll, and now you have a Torah scroll. In that case, it's per minute. Because, in other words, because obviously every scroll has a beginning and an end. You don't have a million scribes writing every letter, right? 300,000, whatever scribes. Okay, so obviously it's the case that this is how Torah scrolls were written, and therefore it's per minute. Rabbi Yehudah says, the Bereshis Ador HaMabel, you could write the portion of Bereshis until the story of the Mabel. The Torah Kahana and Parshas Vayikra, which, like we said, is the traditional place for a child to start learning, is Parshas Vayikra. You can write it until Vayibiyem Hashmini, until Parshas Shmini. Right? That would be the first two parshas. So we see here a debate between Rabbi Yehudah and the first opinion, whether or not the Torah can be written in small segments. Rabbi Yehudah holds at least two types of segments work. Okay. Now we get back to the original discussion. Rabbi Yechanan's opinion was Torah Megillah Nitna. The Torah was given in sections. Shenamar, as the verse states. Okay, so what's the reference here? Just very briefly. David HaMelech was the child of a Moavi woman. Not directly, but Rus was a Moabite, was the great-great-great-grandfather of King David. At some point, if you recall, I think it's actually in Sanhedrin when you get to it. At some point, somebody decided that even a Moabite woman makes her children ineligible to join the congregation, and not just a Moabite man. Okay, and then eventually it was declared that there was a tradition that the restriction was only on a Moabite man and not on a Moabite woman. And David HaMelech was allowed to participate in the congregation. Okay, and David HaMelech is talking here in Psalms about that event. So he says about it, I was sort of redeemed with a Megillah, meaning a portion of the scroll that was written about me. Okay, and evidently David HaMelech felt that the scroll was written in individual portions, and that one of those individual portions redeemed him from being outside of the congregation. Rish Lakish disagrees, and he says Torah Chasumin. No, the Torah was given as one complete scroll, Shenemar, as the verse states. This is at the end of Dvarim, the last Deuteronomy. To take this Torah scroll. Presumably, it was the Torah scroll was taken and meaning written at once. Okay, it also talks about taking the entire scroll. This was after Moshe Rabbeinu stitched together the pieces. What about Rish Lakish? What does he do with the fact that David HaMelech calls the Torah a Megillah, meaning sections? Megillah Sefer Kosavalei. Torah Kula Ikra Megillah. That it's true that the Torah is called a Megillah. Each section is called a Megillah, but it doesn't mean that it was written as a Megillah. Just because it's titled a Megillah doesn't mean it was written as a Megillah. For example, 1 second. I'm sorry. The Chsiv is the verse states. I see the Torah, which he calls a Megillah, a rolled up scroll. Another possibility, like Rabbi Levi, like the opinion of Rabbi Levi. That even though, according to Rish Lakish, the Torah was written down at once, but some of the sections of the Torah were actually transmitted earlier, even if they weren't written down, and that's why it's called the Megillah. So, for example, on the day that Moshe Rabbeinu built, on the day that the Mishkan was consecrated, tabernacle was consecrated, so they needed to know a number of different laws. So, take me a moment here just to parse this with you. So let's go through this slowly. The Gemara goes through each one of them. Elohim, these are the list. Parshas Kehanim. Okay, these are the general rules of being a Kohen. Parshas Leviim. This is how the Leviim were consecrated. Parshas Tmeim. These are the laws of Korban Pesach, the laws of who's Tameh, who's Tahor, because remember, the Mishkan was consecrated on the first day of Nisan, which means that Pesach is coming up in 2 weeks, right? All the women are nervous. But also, you need to know who's Tameh, who can bring a Korban Pesach or not. That parsha was taught as well. Parshas Shiluach Tmeim, those that had to be sent out of the camp. And the reason for this is because the sending out of the camp was dependent on the consecration of the tabernacle. When the tabernacle was not in service, meaning the building was taken down so that the people could travel, then they let back into the camp all those that were previously kicked out, typically Mitzorah. Someone with this spiritual leprosy. Okay, Parshas Achramais, and then the story that happened after the children of Aaron died. That would be Nadav and Avihu died that day. So the section that was taught afterwards was taught to Aaron that day. Okay, Parshas Shtuya Yayin, the laws that prohibit a kohen from serving with alcohol. Right, it's a precursor to all of our alcohol laws. Obviously, I'm kidding. Uparshas Neros, the laws of lighting the menorah, which obviously had to be done that day. Uparshas Paraduma, the law of the red heifer, and obviously because Pesach is coming shortly, they obviously were going to bring a red heifer, so they should have the ashes so that those that are able to become tahar, so that they can be able to bring a Korban Pesach, are able to begin. Okay. Now we get into a discussion of the sort of the two sections, as it were, of the Torah, which is the written law and the oral tradition. Omer Blazer taught Torah roiv b'tzav umiyat al peh. The majority of the Torah was written. It is the scriptural component, the written component. Umiyat, a small portion, is al peh orally, the oral tradition. Shenemar, as the verse says, Echtav lo rubi terasi. I'll write down most of the Torah. Somebody who approaches it will be like a stranger. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan says, Roiv al peh, most of Torah actually is the oral tradition. Umiyot b'ksav, a small amount is written down. Shenemar, ki al pi advar me'ela. Okay, there was a bris. How do you say that? A covenant that was sealed on the Torah Shabbal Peh, on the oral law. Okay, why? Obviously, because the oral law represents the bulk of the tradition. So it makes sense to make a covenant on that which is the bulk of the tradition. Okay, now let's go each position. What do they do with the other side, right? The idach nami aksiv echtav l'rubi terasi. It doesn't say that will write down most of my Torah. Gemara says no. To the contrary, ahu atmui kamatama. This is a. Oh, how do you say this in English? This is he speaks. It's sarcastic. It's sarcasm. In other words, do you think I can write down most of my Torah? Obviously, I can't, because most of the Torah is the oral tradition. Someone who approaches it will be like a stranger, meaning that obviously because he'll be like a stranger, meaning because he only got a small portion of the Torah. Most of the Torah is the oral tradition, not the written one. Okay, the idach nami, the one who says that most of the Torah is written tradition. Why do we find the covenant was sealed over the oral law as opposed to the written law? If the written law is the majority. Samara says, because it's more difficult to learn, so therefore you need a covenant. In other words, you don't need a covenant on that which is easy. You need a covenant on that which is difficult. It's much more difficult to study the oral law. Therefore, we have a covenant. Okay. Dorish Rabbi Yehudah bar Nachmani, Miturgamone, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yehudah bar Nachmani, who was the translator for Rish Lakish, he said as follows: write down these words. Uksiv, and it says, Ki al pi hadvar ma'ela. Because al pi, meaning al peh, the oral tradition. Okay, it said, what do we do? Dvarim shebeksav, the written tradition, you're not allowed to orally remember it. In other words, one who's reading verses, unless they're common verses that everybody knows, should be reading it from a text, should not be quoting it orally. And similarly, we don't keep these books as an oral tradition. We keep them as a written tradition. We write them down. However, Dvarim shebal peh, the oral tradition, we're not supposed to be having Mishnayos and Gemara, Talmud, and any of the other books of Chazal, whether they're Medrash, Zohar, or Torah's Kehanim, Sefra Sefri. Okay, the Ber Bishmal Tana, the students of Bishmal taught a different source. Ela, 1 second. Ki al pi hadvarim ha'ela. What does this mean? Ela meaning specifically Ela, the oral tradition. Ki al pi, according to the mouth of, meaning the oral tradition. Ela atakaisev. V'yetakaisev halachos. 1 second. Sorry. 1 second. I'm sorry. He's going the other way. Write down these words, meaning these words. Write the written words. Write the written words, obviously, specifically. However, the Kaisav halachos do not write down the oral tradition. Rabbi Yochanan says, like the covenant that was sealed over the Torah was sealed over the oral tradition. Shenamar, as the verse states, ki al pi, because on the mouth, meaning the oral tradition, hadvarim ela, the oral tradition, karati et chabris ves Yisrael, we've sealed a covenant. Okay. Let's see the next Gemara briefly. Ma'arvin b'bayis yashin. Okay. No, we'll see. We'll see this tomorrow. Stop here.